Okay, well, good to have you, Mel, on the program today. And we're going to be discussing the whole issue surrounding what is going on right now in the churches. As you know, we're going through this coronavirus pandemic. So, what are your reactions? This is greatly different than, say, just a month ago, isn't it?
Oh, it sure is. As we were thinking about this a month ago, we were uncertain about its extent and intensity. You'd hear rumblings, of course. You heard that it was coming, but not to the effect that we're dealing with today.
No, it's just amazing how this thing has just really ballooned into something huge. And who would have thought that we're just a little more than a few weeks ago, we're going through this whole big crisis, and my goodness, churches are going to have to change their entire operation now. What what have you done, and what has your church done as far as responding to this crisis?
What we have done is stepped up into the 21st century, meaning our church has a very 19th century look. I tell people it may look that way, but we do have electricity and indoor plumbing. Now, however, we have it set up so that the service can be put on Facebook, and we even have a website now where it can be broadcasted that way, which is very new for us because when you look at our sanctuary, when you look at our setup, we are very much in the low to none category of technologically savvy. We don't even have a screen. We don't do PowerPoint. We sing out of hymnals. So this is an unusual thing for us to do.
Wow. Yeah, it's that way with everybody, I think. I think everybody's sort of playing catch up and trying to figure out what to do.
Right.
I know a lot of churches, this first, I'm going to move the microphone over here. A lot of churches are sort of playing catch up, and some of them are not getting it right the first time. I know the First Baptist of Falconer, they had it all set up for Facebook live streaming, and it said, you know, attend church from your living room and everything. So everybody waited, and 11 o'clock came around, and the only thing that was live was the title that said live streaming from Facebook. Nothing else, no audio, no
Oh,
visual, nothing.
no.
It just didn't work.
Oh, you wonder how many other churches experienced that. Uh, probably a vast majority had no problems doing that because they are technologically savvy.
Yeah.
They were equipped and experienced to doing it.
Hmm.
But again, for somebody like ours, probably for some like the First Baptist Church, this was their first crack at it.
Very
And
first, yes.
thankfully, ours went off really without a hitch.
Yeah. Now you
And
had done that before, right? You'd streamed before to Facebook.
the first time I think that it was ever done was Advent just this past year. 2019 was the first time we had done something
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
And thankfully, we do have somebody in our congregation who's very up to speed on the latest with regard to technology and how you can set something up. He's very good at it. If we didn't have him, I don't know what we would do.
Wow.
But yeah, uh, and I didn't look at the two services we have done, but just the initial parts of it. That is the start of it. I saw and I said, "Wow, that's a pretty good shot, pretty good view,"
Hmm.
so that people could see and hear what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Now the week before at First Baptist Falconer, everybody got together, and that was the Sunday where it was kind of like, what's going on? And everybody pretty much attended and was there, although they
Yes,
kept their distance and
yes,
didn't hug or shake hands or anything like that. And but this past Sunday was the first Sunday that the church hasn't met. Now we'll get into a lot of the ramifications. Nobody knows for sure what's going to happen, but
Right.
there are all kinds of implications for what could happen or what might happen. But um, churches, I would say it's more the case a couple weeks ago or a week ago, we're having to come to grips with um, how they should handle this because at that time they hadn't actually banned church meetings. I think it started out like you couldn't get together with over 100 people, and then it got to you can't get together with over 50 people. And remember that whole sequence?
Yeah, or a half capacity. It seemed like 50% full. Again, the numbers being put out by the state and the federal government. You didn't know which ones to follow or which ones were which. So that was difficult until this weekend basically came.
Mm-hmm.
And when we heard Governor Cuomo say what he did, this was to go into effect 8 o'clock on Sunday night.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, there was misunderstandings, or there wasn't really that clear clear communication as to what groups when. Was 8 o'clock Sunday night merely for work related, a lot of things that remained as question marks. And then with the federal government saying only 10, we decided on late Saturday night to call off service because we were having service Sunday morning.
Right.
We were
Right.
going to have it right at the church, and we did broadcast, like I say, through
Yeah.
Facebook. It's interesting, though. We had 10 people at the start of the service, 10 people, which made that limit for the federal recommendation.
Is
So it was
that
really
right?
neat to have a service. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I know most churches you have to have some kind of group there, like the AV guy. You have to have at least or some churches had maybe one guitar player, or they had two or three people in
Right.
the worship band, socially distant from each other.
Yeah.
Um, Now, you were able to have music, right? Or
We had music.
yeah,
Betsy Dahlgren, our piano
yeah.
player, did great, and the piano could be heard.
Hmm.
We even had somebody lead the music.
Yeah,
She has a fantastic voice.
yeah,
So that really helped to carry the day. For those who were listening by way of internet,
yeah.
they could hear what we were singing,
Yes,
as well as look on the internet themselves for the hymns that we were singing.
yeah.
Because those old hymns are there on the internet. You could look them up and, in a sense, sing along at home if you like.
Hmm. Now, when you initially began to realize that the state was about to issue a policy that would shut down effectively church services, I'm sure you're like most pastors, most church leaders. We're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we respond to this?
Right.
And now I referred to this article by 9 Marks, where it talked about this situation that was taking place way, way, way back during the Spanish flu in Washington, D.C. That was a pretty interesting article, wasn't it?
Oh, I think it was very interesting too. And I also got an article from Titusville, Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
right along that same time, of what was happening in the town and the policies that were taken.
Hmm. And what was the policy? Was it the pastors got together in Titusville, or what was the
No,
Titusville recommendation?
the Titusville recommendation was businesses closed, theaters closed. Then on October the 12th, 1918, schools and churches were closed.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not sure if that was a government edict handed down, or if the churches simply said we need to close down out of the situation.
Hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was a recommendation by the town to
Hmm.
have the churches stop meeting
Hmm.
inside.
Hmm. And do you have any idea how long they stayed closed?
That's a very good question. I really don't know. Unlike the article, like you mentioned, from 9 Marks, That article basically said they closed down for the month of October, except for meeting outside. And it's interesting, I saw that when they met outside, they met in government parks.
Isn't that something? So
I know you wonder.
they were thinking if you meet outside, there's less chance of that virus bouncing around.
Right, right. And some churches around here came up with a system by which service was held outdoors. Uh, they stayed in their cars. Somehow they could get a radio frequency, and through that frequency, the service was transmitted.
Wow. So you're talking recently that
Yeah, I
they
think
did
this
that.
happened last Sunday
I've heard
at
of that in Michigan,
yeah,
where you stay
Evangelical
put in your
Covenant
car.
Church. Yeah, drive-in church.
Yeah.
Somebody said
Robert
Crystal
Schuler
Cathedral.
all over
Yeah,
again. Deja vu.
right, right.
Wow. Yeah,
So
that is very, very creative. Um,
yeah,
and so I'm wondering, whoops, looks like, there we go. Um, so let's get into some of the issues that are involved in what is taking place because, as you probably know, also, there are some churches and some pastors who um, are really bristling at this whole thing. And they're saying, we're going to meet anyway because they see it as a religious freedom issue. Now, I'm sure we all, as different pastors, are concerned about the religious freedom angle on it, but I think what I've heard for the most part, most churches, Bible believing across the board, are saying, well, let's go along with this for the while, for the time being. As long as this is a temporary thing, we're cool. If it goes on for a prolonged period, then the issues might come up. Isn't that what you're kind of hearing in relating to submitting to the ruling authorities?
right. You'd hear those who would say, the Bible says, let us not forsake the assembling of ourselves. And they said, that's hard and fast. While I would agree, I also can see the other point of view that I had in a pastoral conversation where the person said, the government is not dictating this from a doctrinal perspective. It has to do with health, community health. And because that has been the basis from which to do that, the element of Romans 13 enters in where you submit yourselves to the governing authorities. So you have those kinds of angles factoring into this kind of decision. And now with our own governor here in New York saying you're going to shelter in place, to me, that put the finality on it for us at Kyantone.
Right.
We will not meet until the green light is given for a certain amount of time.
Right.
If this goes on and on, they'll be hearing, I believe, from the churches.
Just like in D.C. back there.
Yep, right.
In that 9 Marks article, where the pastors, after what was it, a month or so, they began to say, we feel this is going on a little too long, and then they got together, and that by that time, thankfully, the disease had burned through. But that was an awful, terrible time. The Spanish flu. I mean, you're talking.
Sure.
We're talking what, thousands of people in Washington D.C. Just multiple thousands dying.
Could be like one day, 91 deaths, 934 cases. I think it was not until the 28th of October where they began to see a significant decrease. 28 deaths, I thought I read on the 28th, with 235 new cases.
Right.
So cases were escalating then, and I just can't help but notice the comparison of those statistics with respect to the coronavirus.
Right.
It pales in comparison.
Right. And the Spanish flu was killing the younger adults too.
Yes. Right.
So it was targeting the
Whereas
younger adults.
Yeah, it seemed to be much more deadly for the younger group
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the older group,
Right.
whereas the coronavirus seems to flip that,
Right.
invert that, though it is, of course, affecting the young now. Still,
Mm-hmm.
the older generation in regards to the coronavirus is the one that's most greatly impacted.
Right. Yeah, they're the ones that are most at risk. And it's such a strange situation because I think pastors and ministers who want to minister to people, older people even, uh, it's a really weird situation because you can't really go over there and pray with someone. You can't go over there and put your arm around their shoulder and say, "We'll get through this with you." Because if you do, you put them at risk. So it's a catch
Mm-hmm.
22 almost.
Sure is. I mean, like at our church last week, we went through the guidelines. You're not to shake hands. You're not to hug. You're not have to have body contact of any sort. You must keep that distance. However, when I went to sit down at the beginning of the service, before I stood up and gave the announcements, I sat on the front row with his dad and little boy. And the little boy came right over next to me and hugged me. He didn't know what he was. I mean, he was a 5-year-old kid. He
Right,
just does that natural thing when he sees the pastor.
right,
So I just didn't hug him back,
right,
but he hugged me for sure.
right.
So
That's
one of
what's so
those things where
hard.
you don't,
That's what's
yeah,
so
you don't
hard.
anticipate it.
And the
Yeah,
churches, especially churches, are geared up for that personal ministry. And to
right.
have this thing come down like this, it's really, really, really hard. It's very difficult to know what to do. And the hardest part about this is that the social distancing. You
Yeah,
have shut-ins. You
right.
have older people who are scared because they are in the range where they're very susceptible to this, and
Yes,
you can't go over and pray with them and hug them and assure them. It's so strange to have this distancing as
it
a
is.
reality. I've never, ever seen this before in any situation in the church before. Have you?
Yeah, no, I had a parishioner of mine say to me, my mother is in the nursing home. My mother is border case dementia Alzheimer's, and I always go to visit my mother. However, she cannot do that now. And as this is the policy, I can't help but think that this will really disturb the mind of this mother who wonders why her daughter's not coming anymore to see her.
That's right.
So that element is something that's a built-in frustration with the kind of policy that has been imposed upon the community. And I can understand the policy
Right.
regarding the nursing home. I can
I
understand that.
think everybody, pastors and church people, church leaders especially, uh, we're all understanding now what the plan is.
Yeah,
And the plan being to keep the curve low rather
yeah,
than high.
right.
And because if you just let the epidemic spread into the general community, which is what I think they were thinking about in England at first for a few weeks. They were like, let's just let the herd immunity develop, let everybody get it, and then everybody's immune to it. But then that kind of changed after they began to realize and look at some of these other countries like Italy and Spain, and you see some of these other
Yeah,
countries. If you let it go way up and you let it peak, then what happens? You overwhelm the medical system, the hospital,
right.
and all that, and you have people who are dying of simple things that they couldn't get into the hospital for care. So you have to keep the peak low, and if you can keep it low enough through social distancing, then the hospitals can take care of the people who are sick, right? I mean, that's the plan.
The plan and what we're seeing now is modeling. Uh, like you say, the epi curve. We've all seen the curve, and the objective is to flatten the curve.
Flatten the curve, yeah.
As we met with a doctor, us clergy, and this was of all religions
Hmm.
that were invited to this. This wasn't just the evangelicals.
Was that the
This
one
was
at
the,
St. Luke's, was it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. The doctor said, I asked him about it. How trustworthy is this curve? And he said, well, in less developed countries, it tends to go higher. In more well developed countries, the curve tends to flatten.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I respect the medical opinion and their models, but can we really trust the models? I just have a question about that.
Right. Yeah. Now that is the game plan, as far as what the governors and now I think the president and all his advisors are saying we need to do this. The big question is how long is this
Correct.
going to take? Because
Right.
there is a real question mark as far as churches, and we can talk about this. We might as well talk about it right now. I was when I go back to Michigan. I sometimes attend with my mother at this popular church called Northridge, and it's a large, large mega church. I think they have 12,000 or
Mm.
so members, and they have a. I'll see if you can see this. I'll try to share my screen here with you. And I was doing some calculating and different things. Let me get you. You can see this screen here. And one of the things that it showed on the screen was this church has. Can you see that there?
Yeah, I see a graph.
Okay, yeah. And it says that the total budget, it looks like it's around $13 million for this big mega church.
Mm. Mm.
And so if you divide the 13.5 million, 52 weeks out of the year, you're going to come up with around 230,000 or so per week. Okay, they have to have that every week.
Yeah.
And they would have 3 services, so they're probably having 3 to 4, about 3,000 every service. So they have 3 services, a Saturday night and 2 on Sunday morning. Now, it says here they have excess or deficit for the year. This is 2019, 3.79, 3.8 million. So possibly, let's say that they had 3.8 cash on hand, just for emergencies or whatever. So if they have to come up with 230,000 every Sunday to meet their budget, that gives them 4 months of cash if they don't get very much in offerings. And if they
Right.
do collect some, but not all, I think they're going to actually be down 50% or so. So it may
Mm.
give them 6 months or so. But can you imagine like these big churches that are, they're going to really be struggling, and even the smaller churches are going to be struggling because they don't even have the kind of cash reserves that some of the big ones do.
Yeah. In our situation at Kind Tone, we're in good financial shape,
Mm-hmm.
but the situation has resulted in us also stepping up into the 21st century in that category because
Mm-hmm.
the past Sunday, our trustee got up and says, you can do online giving.
Mm-hmm.
You can use your credit card to give this way. And he gave the instructions, and I guess it's on our Facebook page what you do.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see how that develops. And we just said you can still do it the old fashioned way,
Mm-hmm.
send it in by check through the mail.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure people will do that.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the most commonly practiced way of having tithes and offerings continue to be received during this time when the
Mm-hmm.
church will not be meeting
Mm-hmm.
at on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock.
Yeah. Now, in that respect, probably some of the smaller churches might actually come out okay because they're small enough to realize that everybody's contribution will get there some way, whether
Yeah.
somebody drops it off for them or they send it in the mail or
Right.
whatever. But if you have these big mega churches where you
Mm,
have 12,000 people and
right.
they're seekers and various levels of commitment and non-commitment, and the seeker sensitive format has pretty much gotten them there in the seat, but not much beyond that. Wow. When I went on the Ridge Church website, I saw that the Facebook live service they were broadcasting had 500 people watching for the main service,
Mm,
11:15
mm-hmm.
or something. And then there was also another 200 and some on there was YouTube and Facebook they were broadcasting to, and between the two of those, it was 750 people watching.
Mm.
And then on their main website, they might have had, say, 500, so 1,200 people watching. But they normally have for that service 3 to 4,000. So I don't know if the people are going to be watching afterwards, but I wouldn't be surprised at some of these big mega churches. They're only going to get maybe a quarter to a half of the people actually participating under this format.
Yeah, it certainly will be interesting to see how that all comes out in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, where I'm at, I think the people will generally find a way
Hmm.
by which to continue their patterned giving
Hmm.
uh, throughout each month of the year.
Hmm. I know Rick Warren out there in California, Saddleback Church. It was just last week. He was saying, I think it was after the first Sunday, a couple Sundays ago. He was saying on Monday morning, well, we can't meet at the church, but you should go to your small group,
Mm,
which is 10 or below people, because that's at that point that's when the governor was saying you could meet with 10 or less people. So he was telling people to go to a small group, but now this week he can't even say that.
yeah, right,
So
right.
he
I
was
know.
playing up the whole thing. This is why we've developed a small group network for just like times like this. And so we can continue to have church in our small groups, even though we can't meet in a big setting. And just less than a week later, he had to walk that back and basically say, you can't even do that. You can't
I
even
know.
get in your small group.
And isn't it interesting that as we see states take this policy of shelter in place, they're mainly from the blue states. I mean, from California, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey. Purple would be Pennsylvania. Red would be Ohio. Did I
Right.
say Illinois is another one? That's a blue
It
state.
is
And I guess
strange.
Louisiana.
It is.
Louisiana has now, and that's basically the only red state, along with, I'd say, Ohio generally is a red one.
Yeah, it's very, very strange that
Yeah.
the more liberal Democratic governors are the ones that are calling for the total lockdowns.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but be that as it may, I think churches are willing to go along with this. One of
Mhm.
the other verses that I heard that was thrown around a lot was love thy neighbor as thyself. We need to be
Yes.
thinking in terms of do what you would want others to do unto you. And if you were if you were not infected, you wouldn't want someone else to give you the coronavirus at church.
Right.
So even though you're brave enough and you're saying, well, I'm willing to risk being infected, you might already be infected and you're giving it to other people. So um, I think most church people and Christians are willing to play along with the government's recommendations for now. But if this drags on a long time, I mean, it's going to become very interesting to see what happens if we're having to do this a month from now or 2 months from now.